So today I wanted to chat a little bit about what I think the goal of the next balance patch should be, and that's to nerf the ever-loving crap out of Protoss. Because I firmly believe that Protoss has been OP since roughly 2018 to 2020, and it's only gotten worse since then, and I will make my case as thoroughly as I can here with the time that I have. So, I want to go over like what changes led to this and then just what indicators we have of this because, evidence in StarCraft when you're talking about balance is a pretty big deal. People take that pretty seriously and for good reason. So, I want to go over all of that and just sort of how we got here. And just to be clear, because I see Miro in chat here saying, maybe since like 2021 they've been overpowered. I think that sometimes in StarCraft it takes people time to adapt and shift to the meta and adjust to changes and design and balance and things like that. And I think this was one of those times. I think Protoss was changed like so fundamentally when the mothership core was removed that it took a while for people's playstyles to adapt and shift their focus on which areas are more important or less important now, given that there's no mothership core and you have shield battery instead. It changed a lot of things, so I think it took people a lot of time to adjust. But I will go into more detail here. We're going to be looking a little bit about basic StarCraft logic, some build order differences between when we had mothership and when we didn't. We're going to look at a Ligulac balance report, no Napa GM representation, and if I can find some of this stuff, Miro, if you want to help me actually, some links to the ESL weekly representation stuff that people were showing 6 weeks ago or something on Reddit. And also if we have some upset tournament results, that might be interesting to look at. But honestly, these things are a little bit anecdotal, so they're not really the biggest indicators in my mind anyway, so who knows if we'll even talk about that. Anyway, to begin, let's talk about Chrono Boost, because Chrono Boost was changed significantly. I believe, let me just look this up really quick while I chat here. So I think Chrono Boost was changed around the same time that the mothership core was removed. Let me just see if I can find that. Oh, geez, Chrono Boost has gone through a lot of changes.
I'm talking about community.
Talking about community. How's it going? Thanks for the follow, Teddy. Alrighty, these don't have dates. That's really annoying. Anyway, it doesn't really matter exactly when it happened. Really, I'm just talking about the differences here. So, in the past, it was a continuous chrono at the launch of Legacy of the Void. The huge difference with this is that Burst is a lot more flexible and forgiving, so it's just better, even if the numbers are exactly the same. Even if the rate that it gives you matches up exactly the same, a Burst is still better than a continuous, because with a continuous, you have to switch over your chrono at the exact second that it no longer becomes useful in one place and you want it somewhere else. And any amount of delay or, going too early or too late is inefficiency. And so it becomes like a highly skill-based thing. Whereas if it's burst, it's pretty much like you have a wide window where any point, if you use a chrono in that window, you're going to get 100% of the chrono's effectiveness and you're not going to lose anything. So this just made it way easier and a lot more flexible and forgiving. And in StarCraft, this makes it way better because it means that your attention doesn't have to be focused as diligently on the chrono. So I'm really just explaining this stuff here, as you can see. You had to switch the chrono over, as I was just saying. Large windows. But yeah, I don't actually have the numbers in front of me, but I'm pretty sure the burst is slightly better. It might be possible to look at pro production rates or something, but I'd have to find a really boring macro VOD or something like that. So I apologize that I don't have the actual number on this, but really my point is that a burst format is just better than a continuous. a lot more forgiving and easier to play. Moving on, we're going to talk about the mothership core versus the shield battery. So, mothership core. This, I think, was a massive, massive change for Protoss and really made Protoss a lot stronger. It used to cost 100 gas, and it was basically mandatory. It was considered a huge risk to skip the mothership core. And that slowed builds down quite a lot. Because spending 100 gas, that's like a pretty big speed bump in your build if you don't want to spend that gas. It's a lot more efficient to just go straight into the first tech choice that you have. On the other hand, the shield battery costs no gas, and it's only built when it's needed or for safety. Meaning that you don't always have to make a shield battery every game, like at a certain point in your build. There might be a place where you want one out of safety, right? But you're doing that so that you don't have to take a gamble or like make units or something like that. And even then, 100 minerals is a lot better than 100. The gas is a pretty significant, uh, speed bump in people's macro. Gas doesn't just magically appear. You kind of have to plan when you do it, and it lowers your mineral income significantly, especially in the early game. So this is a big deal. Also, pylon overcharge required you to have the mothership core in position. This is way different than shield battery. Shield batteries are cheap enough that you can just build them preemptively, and you can warp in on location, because anywhere that you have a pylon for a shield battery, you're going to be able to warp in. You're never actually going to be out of position if you spend 100 to 200 minerals. Now, I can hear a lot of Protoss players being upset with me for saying this. I'm not talking about like a full-on push. You're not going to stop a tank push with a shield battery and defensive warp-ins, probably. Not really talking about that. I'm talking about, things like Widow Mine drop, Ling run by, some Hellions coming in, like a 1 medevac drop or something like that, the small things that happen in like the early and mid game, because that's really like the area where most games, unless the both players are really even, the game is usually decided in the early and mid game. Or at least, I don't know, it kind of used to be. Lately, it's been feeling like it's so hard to kill people that we get to late game no matter what. But anyway. So yeah, basically we just swapped needing to have the core in position to needing to spend a couple hundred minerals at each base. So I guess like it kind of slows down Protoss like progression if you think about it like that. But I mean, realistically, like Protosses often float quite a lot, and just to be able to afford a warp in when they need it, right? So asking them to spend like a few hundred minerals at each base, like it's really not that much. If you're just talking about like the first 3 bases, which is really where, most of these things are decided, that's only 600 minerals. And you got to do that over the course of like a pretty long period. So it's not like you just got to drop 600 minerals like at one time. It's really not that crazy. So yeah, I mean, I think the shield battery being switched for the mothership core was a massive, massive change. A lot of people will point to battery overcharge, but I really think that was more just what made people use the shield battery more and start to see its strength. I really think that and we can even see this in the current patch. Shield battery by itself is just insanely strong and way better than having mothership core in many ways. So, how does this stuff affect Protoss build orders? Because that's really, where this matters. If I'm saying like, Protoss doesn't have to spend gas, but the reality is that they actually do have to spend a lot of extra minerals, then it would even out and it wouldn't matter, right? If that was really the case. If shield battery was roughly equivalent in strength to mothership core, and it was roughly the same cost, then we wouldn't really see very many differences in build orders. However, that's not the case. We see many differences in build orders. We see third bases are coming between 10 to 50 seconds earlier, which is massive. Then we also see the first Stargate unit coming out 15 seconds earlier. Again, massive. That's half a macro cycle for Zerg. It's huge, especially when we're talking about, a game where like fast Oracle exists. This is a massive change. Warpgate finishes at about the same time too. So they're not like sacrificing anything. And the probe count from the games that I looked at was between 1 and 2 of the same probe count. Like they're in the newer versions of these builds, they're like 1 or 2 probes behind at the same like minute mark in the game. You can see that here actually. 39 workers at 405, and then at 405 we're at 38 workers here, but there's like 2 in production. Right. A very small difference in the worker count, but everything else is the same, and the Stargate and the Warp Gate just comes way earlier. So, let's see. We could just go real quickly in here just to show it so you guys know I'm not making this up. We can look at, what is this? Game 1, Deer versus Losira in GSL 2016, Season 1. Let's just mute that so that we can go over here, and then what time in the game are we looking for? We are looking for 2:37. See the Stargate dropping. And this is interesting too, because this is actually a later Stargate than this Stargate, and the Oracle is still faster. Okay. Let's see. Let's just tab over a bunch here. All right. And there it is, Stargate. 2:37. Then first Phoenix starts at 3:20. Over here. There we are, first Phoenix. And now Mothership Core. You don't make the Mothership Core in the new builds, but I can just show you. Right here. Mothership Core. That was at 3:30. Then we got the third base at 3:50. There it is. Third base. And then we should see Warp Gate finish. 4:05. 39 workers. There we are. Warp Gate just finished. And he's at 39. Now let's compare. Looking at Hero versus Rogue, DreamHack Dallas, 2025. I really wish that I had one where he went faster, or where this one was a faster Stargate, or we could compare it to a later Stargate here. Okay. Oops, too far. Back a little bit more. Alrighty. 221. 23 workers. Right about here. Oh, perfect. Just started. Okay. And we see the first Oracle, 3:05. Oops, too far. There it is, Stargate finishing. And the Oracle. Then we can see he's making no shield batteries, Mothership Core cannons. And third base at 3:40. Skip forward a little bit here. There it is, 3:40. And then Warp Gate, that's at 4:05. 38 workers. Back a little bit more here, just so we can actually see it finish. There it is. Oop. And the bar is in the way here, but it says 38 right there. So, I know the Stargate difference is pretty significant here. Um, but really, why is he able to do this is really the question that I'm getting at here. Right? Like, how are you able to rush this so much? You have no defenses, right? Your third base is still earlier. And this is like the 340 third. I'm sure a lot of you are screaming right now going, they also expand at like 305, which I know. I see that a lot too. Absolutely insane to me. I don't know why we haven't talked about this more before in the community. It really just does not make sense to me that we just like took out that 100 gas requirement and then just sort of hand wove it and said, it'll be fine. Like everything's the same. But meanwhile, Protoss's builds are just like a lot tighter because they don't have to spend that 100 gas. So everything comes out a lot earlier. Okay. Moving on. So, these are all things that in my mind would probably make Protoss overpowered. But how do we know that it actually did make Protoss overpowered? Right? So here's where we start to look at the data. We're gonna start with the Ligulac, which I know is everybody's favorite, but it's StarCraft. It is what it is. It's what we have, so it's what we're gonna have to use. I'll pull that up here so that we can actually see like larger of the charts here, but I do have copies of the charts pasted here. So we're gonna be looking at both charts here. If you've never seen this before, I'll explain it all. So the first chart, we're going to go over, let's see, I'm just going to put this on my other screen here so that you guys can see this while I yap about it. I'm going to get rid of TVZ there so we can just see Protoss versus Terran and Protoss versus Zerg. So since Protoss is the first race here in this versus, if the graph goes up, that means Protoss is stronger. Very simple explanation of this. But if you read this, though, it explains what this actually does, right? This is looking at historical month-by-month win rates for non-mirror matchup in the database, right? So we're looking at pro players here. This yields information about the metagame near the top of the skill ladder, not to be confused with, although likely highly correlated to, actual game balance throughout the whole player population. So this is just looking at like the meta at the very top. However, that is sort of what we balance around, so this is the information that we usually look at. Okay. So we can see here, PVT, let's just look at this right here. PVT, we can see Protoss is favored from about 2018 to 2020. If we look here, we can see down here there's lines that show dates and things, and these are balance patches. So 2018, 2020, you can see here 54, 55%. Here it's a little 51. Here it's a little bit lower, 49, 53, 53, 51 almost, 52, 53. Now you can see there's a few periods where it dips below 50. 50% would be right about here. You can see, oh yeah, it's this line right here. Line right here is the 50% line. You can see there's not a lot of places where Protoss dips below. It's like 1, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5-ish. You could say 6, maybe, being generous. Compared to like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There was like a lot more of these periods where Protoss was stronger than Terran. Right? Moving on, though, if we go to about 22 to 24, you can see that Protoss was actually slightly underperforming during this period versus Terran. Again, this is the 50% line. And it's kind of the reverse, where Terran is a little bit favored here and here and here and here. or Protoss, excuse me, is a little bit favored for these parts. And then for the rest of this period, Terran is favored. However, in 2025, and basically from 2024 onward, we can see, there's some fluctuation here, but it's definitely trending upward here. Although, this could be just in isolation. Maybe this doesn't continue up here. We'll have to see. Now, if we look at PVZ, there we are. PVZ, we can see Zerg was favored from 2018 to 2021. You can see that here. If this is the 50% line, you can see Protoss is having a pretty rough time during this period. Not a good time to be a Protoss player playing against Zerg right here. However, if we move on, you can see that, let's see. From 22 to 24. So I had written here. Oh, excuse me. I'm reading the wrong section here. Okay. So, because I was going to say that doesn't match what I'm seeing on the graph here. Yeah, I was reading slightly underperforming from 22 to 24, but that was versus Terran. Versus Zerg, Protoss is strongly favored from 21 to 25. You can see starting in 2021 and through 2025, it's just been ridiculous in the Protoss favor territory. Like, this is insane. This is the 50% line right here. So only one period, August 2023, and one over here, April 2021, and then these are all 2020. So only in 2 periods since 2021 has Zerg actually been favored against Protoss. That's a little bit crazy. Okay. So, how do we interpret this? Keep in mind, this chart is literally just raw win rates at the pro level, right? It doesn't take player skill into account. An upset is considered the same as an expected result on this chart. It has no way to distinguish between the two. And also, we have to keep in mind that during this period, from like 2019 to 2022, right about here, this is when like all of the top Protoss players were retiring. Like all of them. I will give a list here. All of these players retired at some point from 2019 to 2022. Trap, Classic, Zest, who arguably retired earlier, Hero, SOS, and Parting. That's crazy. And meanwhile, also keep in mind, Maru winning a lot of GSLs. Clem getting very, very good. Cyril, very, very, very good. And those are EU players, Clem and Cyril, who didn't really have the same military service issues. I know Cyril did have military service, but not to the same degree. He was actually able to like rent out a private office and practice on his own while he was in the military. I don't really think it's a fair comparison. However, during this same period that all these Protoss players were retiring, we saw Protoss performance in PvT falling, which makes sense. If you're up against really strong Terran players and you're losing all your best players, your performance is probably going to drop because, as I was saying, this chart does not take player skill into account. So we would sort of expect to see that. However, we also saw performance in PvZ rising during the same period, which is kind of crazy, as you can see PvZ down here. And, yes, it was definitely not favored, right? But if you have players retiring and it's rising here, then it's like, oh, like Protoss got way stronger here, And then we don't just match the level that we were at versus Zerg, we far exceed it. Anyway, that is this chart. Now we will look at the second chart, which is this bad boy right here. And for this, you're just going to get rid of the Terran and Zerg lines, and then we can just look at the Protoss. Okay, so as explained by the text here above the chart, this chart measures the difference between actual performance and predicted performance. Now you're asking, how does it predict performance? By comparing previous results of that player. So it basically has like an internal ELO, like a, matchmaking rating that it gives players, and it tries to predict how well they'll do based off of this, and it adjusts, how skilled it thinks that player is based off of their recent results, right? So let's say, for example, a B tier player starts beating S tier players. This would be unexpected, and those results would push the performance of their race up on this chart, because that would be an unexpected result where they're performing higher than expected, right? However, if over time this same player continues to beat other top players, their predicted results will be higher, and then it won't be an unexpected result anymore. It'll be the expected result, and it won't push this graph. Excuse me. And it won't push this graph any higher. So as the graph, or as like the data catches up to where a player's skill level is, the graph will start to trend toward flat, right? So if you think about this happening across like all StarCraft players, right? And it says, where is that? Here we are. As ratings catch up to the performances of the players, this chart will tend, I think they meant to say trend, toward equilibrium, meaning 50%, even if balance never changes. So let's say that somebody, let's say that, for example, let's say that Zerg is incredibly overpowered, and let's say that they win 99% of their games against the other races, right? At first, that would be insane, and it would push the chart up drastically. Like the Zerg chart here would just be like at 100%, right? But then over time, even if you change nothing and Zergs continued to win 99% of their games, over time, this graph would eventually show 50% because that would actually be the expected result. Just to explain how this actually works. Yeah, that's how this works, okay? That's important to understand, because if we look at this, we're going to see some interesting things here. If you observe, Protoss trending upward since about 2018. Again, this is the 50% line right here. It's actually a little bit lower, you can see if we add everybody here, it's a little bit different, right? But when it's Protoss, oh, excuse me. This is the 0 line right here. This is negative 50. But yeah, the 50% line is all the way up here. Was the joke I was making. Alrighty. I'm sorry. But this does upset me. Okay. So, as I was saying, please observe Protoss going up strongly since 2018. And if you remember what I just told you about how this graph works, if balance was never to change, we would expect this to trend toward this 0 line right here. But instead, we see it breaking away from the 0 line. And also, keep in mind, what was that, 2019 to 21? We said where Protoss lost all of its top Protoss players. That was a pretty big deal. And yet, we see it's a little bit shaky right here, but it doesn't really fall off the rails. We have a couple periods where it's below. You would kind of expect this because, you just lost all your best players, right? But then after that, gosh, I mean, there's only this right here, this. this, those two. That's pretty much it. And then the rest, Protoss is like strongly favored. And keep in mind, this is using, player ratings. So these are players that are winning games that, according to the data, they're not expected to win. I think that's significant. I think that we should make a note of this. I think this is probably the strongest evidence that we have that Protoss has been overpowered since roughly this 2018 to 2020 period that I'm talking about here. All right. Now, I also want to look at no Napa GM representation. And for that, we're going to pop that over here. Okay. So, here we have, and this is a little bit confusing because this is showing ladder seasons at the bottom here. But because, I knew this would be a little bit difficult to understand for the timeline, I do have in my notes here, I have some dates about when things were, because you can actually look up, or I'll just show the page for it right here. You can look up the dates of the BattleNet seasons right here. You can actually see like when that was, and then you can translate that into dates down here. So, looking at this graph here, this is GM representation across all servers. And we can see there is a pretty significant shift that happens here around season 43. And this is an interesting period where things start to even up, right? Then after that, we get a strong diversion here, and Zerg just dips way down, and Protoss just shoots way up, and Terran is doing all right until last few years here. And this was kind of the same story as what we saw over here, by the way. Terran's kind of in the middle, and then toward the end, they start to drop off. And same thing over here. Not TVZ. Maybe it was just this graph that I was thinking of. Anyway. So, let's go into this graph here and let's see when this was. What happened to lead to this. So the mothership core, that was removed and replaced with the shield battery November 2017. At the time, Protoss was lagging, and Zerg had a big lead on Protoss and Terran. After that, you can see Protoss starts to catch up. Keep in mind, this is the start of a long trend of Zerg nerfs, so Zerg representation also starts falling. I believe that was 38, season 38. I thought I had this in my notes actually, but it seems like I don't. Let me just look at that really quick. I believe that it is season 38. Should be like November or something like that. Yeah. Okay, so that was November 2017, so it's not 38. It's this one, 34. That's what it is. Right about here, season 34. That would be here. This is where the mothership core was removed. And you can see at the time, Zerg leading, Terran lagging pretty significantly, Protoss lagging even more. So during this period, it was not Protoss favored at all, just to be clear. Protoss struggled in the beginning of Legacy. But after that, we can see Protoss starts to catch up. And, like I was saying, keep in mind, this is like the start of when the Zerg nerfs really started kicking in. We can see the start of the downward Zerg trend right here. Just trying to give context here. Now, when we get to season 43, 44, we can see a dramatic shift. And this was when shield battery overcharge was introduced. That would be season 44 is June 10th, 2020. That's right here. And battery overcharge introduced the day before, June 9th, 2020. So this is, to me, this is very clear what happened here. We can see if we look a little bit further down here, we can see a slight dip at season 61, but then Protoss representation shoots back up into a new all-time high. And what was that? What do you think? Energy recharge. Energy recharge. That was introduced November 25th, 2024. Season 61 started on November 10th, 2024. That's right around here. We can see, again, like I was saying earlier, when they removed the mothership core, introduced the shield battery. Took some time for people to adapt. It's a pretty significant change. I think this was similar. When we got rid of battery overcharge and we replaced it with energy, it was a pretty big change. It took a little while for a lot of Protoss players to adapt. So we did see a drop right here. But then it just shoots right back up. And you also have to keep in mind, when this patch was announced and it came out, the narrative from the Protoss community was that this would be a horrible nerf for Protoss and that they would never be able to survive without battery overcharge. But we saw a very different story if we look up here. So yeah, I'm not sure what else we really should get into here. We could look at like I was saying, we could look at like ESL weekly cups if I could even find them. I don't even know how we find those. ESL open cups should be it. Do we have some dates? This is not what I'm looking for. And it's kind of what I'm looking for, but not really the information. Well, regardless, that was my TED talk for today. I'm sure that this is probably not going to be the most popular opinion among a lot of people. I understand that, the counter argument to this is like, well, we need Protoss players to be able to win. Like, we need to balance around the highest level. That's how StarCraft has always been balanced. But I don't know. I think there's really like balance that you like you have to thread the line between are you going to emphasize the game feeling fair and like requires equal effort from both opponents, or are you going to emphasize results, because I think it really doesn't make any sense to say, we need the game to be balanced at the highest level, so we're going to buff the weakest race at the highest level until they are competitive. That doesn't really make sense to me, because that just completely ignores like player skill, right? So it's like you're not really talking about making the game balanced at the highest level. You're just talking about getting balanced results at the highest level, right? That just doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, anyway, I can see how, difference of opinion there, I guess. But those are my thoughts. I don't want to go on too long with this. We'll end it here.